For many of us, it's our worst fear. To lose a loved one at the hands of another and never receive answers or justice. But unfortunately, there are hundreds of cases just like this across the globe. From unidentified doves with nobody to miss them, to the gruesome murder of children. These are just three horrific, historic mysteries that will leave you with more questions than answers. Welcome to Voices in Panic. Eugene Butler's victims. Eugene Butler was born sometime in 1849 to Ephraim and Rebecca Butler. Raised in Buffalo, New York, Butler lived a life of luxury thanks to his parents' massive wealth. In 1882, aged around 33, Butler moved to North Dakota and purchased a 480-acre farm in Niagara. Here, he was generally seen as a recluse. He never married or had children, avoided contact with his neighbors, and was only known to leave his house when he journeyed to the city of Larimore for business. Although it's unclear what his line of business was, during his time away from the farm, he would hire workers to run it for him. It wasn't long before Butler started exhibiting odd behaviors and signs of mental illness. However, he began suffering from hallucinations and complained that invisible individuals were chasing him. And in 1906, things took a turn for the worse. When Butler started riding out into the night, screaming and scaring his neighbors and other locals who were living nearby. He was, as a result, considered a public nuisance and was admitted to the North Dakota State Hospital. During his time in the hospital, he frequently expressed his fear about the invisible people who were chasing him, and also stated that he was afraid of having his photo taken, believing that the camera would suck out his soul. He was rarely considered a problem, and was not known to be violent. He showed no tendencies toward homicidal behavior. In fact, he was considered to be gallant and fond of attending hospital dances, and even developing a crush on one of the female doctors. He died on October 22nd, 1913, aged around 64. His remains were sent to Middleport, New York, where he was buried by his relatives. After Butler's death, his estate was divided between his living relatives and renovations were started on the property. While digging beneath the house, however, workers discovered something bizarre: 6 sets of skeletal remains. They had been dumped in a hole dug from outside of the house beneath its foundation. They were later determined to all belong to teenage boys and young men, and their skulls had been crushed. At least 2 of his victims had broken legs. It was suggested in newspapers at the time this was done to fit the body into the dump site. The murder weapon was determined to be a sharp instrument, which left a clearly defined hole in the left side of each skull. And the victims were believed to have been killed between 1903 and 1906. Before it was established that the remains belonged to young men, it was rumored that Butler was responsible for the slaying of an entire family. But police noted that no families were missing from the area. Other details soon emerged about the victims. One of them was aged between 15 and 18, and another had a crooked nose. Investigators were unable to establish their identities, but suspected that all the victims were homeless individuals who'd been hired by Butler to help work on his farm during the summer when he went away on business. This would explain why nobody had reported them missing, or noticed that Butler's farmhands had vanished. Detectives also theorized that the victims were killed because their employer believed they were stealing from, as he reportedly had a lot of cash lying around his house, and he was known to be paranoid and delusional. Furthermore, no personal belongings or clothing were found with the bodies. It is believed that the victims were buried nude, and their clothing was burned by Butler after their deaths. After word leaked about the murders, curious locals and onlookers visited the farm with the intention of looking at the crime scene. It was later discovered that some of the bones had gone missing from the remains, suggesting that visitors had stolen them. In the 108 years since the bodies were discovered, none have been identified. One possible lead emerged shortly after the remains were found when Leo Urbanski, a wealthy farmer residing in Minnesota, claimed that his brother, John, who sometimes used the surname Miller, may have been one of the victims. He had gone missing near Niagara in 1902, and before he vanished, had written to his brother to inform him that he was working for a bachelor in the city. The letter's postmark indicated that it had been mailed from Larimore, the town where Butler conducted business. However, it is unconfirmed whether or not one of Butler's victims was John Urbanski. The most recent effort to identify